recording.
Yeah, we're recording. But are they both still on serve?
Yes, they're both still on serve and we're recording.
Yes, we are. Guys, if you're listening, the finals of the men's tournament at the Australian Open is still going on. So this might be the most distracting podcast we've ever recorded.
Not only are the finals still going on, but we are it's in the closest possible stage. It's the fifth set of a Grand Slam final. It's Jannik Sinner against Daniel Medvedev. Anastasia cannot contain the tension. This is a new experience. This is probably going to be a bit of a messy episode because we're both going to be distracted by the match. I'm currently recording this on my phone in the middle of a hotel in Scotland. And this could be utter chaos. At the minute, just to jump straight in on here, we're kind of in a weird state of emotional conflict about this match. So for you guys who might be newer to this, we've got Jannik Sinner who's trying to win his first Grand Slam, and Daniel Medvedev who's trying to win his second but his first Australian Open, having been heartbroken 2 years ago against Rafael Nadal when he lost from being 2 sets up. And he's in danger of the same thing happening again with Jannik Sinner.
The most improbable way ever. It's, I wasn't able to stay up and start the match because that would be 3:30, 4 a.m. my time. So I thought, Sinner's been playing great. I'm going to go to sleep and wake up to Jannik Sinner winning his first Grand Slam, and I'll rewatch the match and it'll be all great. And I woke up to him being 2 sets to love down and have now watched him claw back up. And we're now in the 5th set. And the conflict, as Nick has said, is if Medvedev loses this after leading for 2 sets, it will be devastating because this is the second time it's happened to him. And I mean, I don't know how I would take it, but it would be really devastating, especially also based on how this tournament has gone for him. And we can sort of jump in and like maybe work our way backwards, but Daniil has had one of the just toughest, longest runs to the final of the Australian Open. He has played all his matches, all but one of his matches were not straight sets. He's played 4-set matches, he's played 5-set matches. One of them was a straight set match. But he's had the most hours on court. He was almost out. I think it was it the 3rd round? He almost didn't make it through the 3rd round. So it's been really tough going for him. And this I cannot explain how devastating this would be if he did lose. But we're going to keep watching and we'll update you if something happens in the middle of the podcast as we record.
There may well be squawking and screaming from either one of us.
For whatever reason.
During this.
It's going to be a lot of happiness and crying because I have to say, Daniil Medvedev is a character, but he's a very sort of smart and insightful player. And we've got some really great gems from him from this Australian Open. And I will be sad for him if he doesn't make it through, even though I will be extremely happy for Jannik Sinner.
Yeah, I am in the same position of I want Sinner to get the breakthrough. I don't want Medvedev to get heartbroken again. And I've kind of almost moved to the point where I started the match rooting for Sinner, kind of just sort of 55-45 Sinner, and it's kind of switched to Medvedev. But then I didn't want Sinner to lose in straight sets because I didn't want him to get knocked back. So now I'm kind of in this happy period of like, Sinner's proved he can win a Grand Slam regardless of this because he's done really, really well to come back. And obviously, Medvedev did something similar against Nadal at the US Open in 2019. But yeah, I think for me, who's going to be more gutted about losing? It's Medvedev right now. Especially, as you say, like the way he's worked through this tournament, like he's been 2 points away from losing a match 3 times this tournament. And actually, if he wins, looking by the match clock, if he wins this, I mean, he'd have to completely dominate the next 4 games and win in 10 minutes to avoid this. He he will spend the most hours on court to win a Grand Slam title, which will break a record set by Carlos Alcaraz at the US Open in 22.
So a lot on the line here. But while the match is still going on, let's work our way back to the beginning when, we had all the players on the grounds and we were in round one and everything was happy and sunshiny. And give you our thoughts on the Australian Open, how this tournament has gone, and what matches moved us, what players moved us, and talk about the winners if we get them all before the end of this recording. But
I mean, we do have one of them already, to be fair.
we do. And we can always talk about that one and then update you later. But yeah, so general thoughts on the Australian Open. I mean, obviously we're not there, so we can't sort of give, on the ground coverage, but the Australian Open has just looked like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's called the Happy Slam. That's how they market themselves for a reason. I think it does look like a great day out if you go. Obviously, you could sit and watch the match on the big screen in Garden Square. There's lots of different things to do. It's kind of they've kind of marketed it as kind of like a grand day out if you go. And there's, especially during the first week, there's always stuff happening, singles, doubles, whatever. So to go must be fantastic. Obviously, that's a bit of a pipe dream for both of us. But I think from sort of trying to watch on TV in the time zones we're in has been a bit of a struggle. But I do enjoy waking up to tennis. It has to be said. There's a nice feeling of turning on having that on the background whilst I'm getting ready for the rest of my day. And generally, there've been some pretty good matches to follow.
It's a little tougher where I am because during the first week, you could probably get matches on starting at around 6:30 p.m. So you were more sort of ending your day with tennis. And then depending on how late the night matches went, or, for example, this match that's still going on in the early hours of the morning here, most of the tennis was happening while I was asleep. So what happened was I was trying to stay up as late as possible to watch the tennis. And, you could do that for about a week. And then after that, my body just said, no more. You must watch replays from now on. So definitely watching the Australian Open has been tough, but I think also it's made me super sympathetic for Australians in general who try and follow tennis because we're dealing with what they have to deal with for most of the year.
Yeah. I mean, it's not so bad for them when it gets to the US hardcourt season. Although having said that, it's kind of similar. It'd probably be similar for, like, to me with the Australian Open in the UK, like the night session matches at the US would start at midday their time. So they can wake up to the day session and then they'll probably have to work through the night session, which is, what I have to do for Australia. But like for me, like what you're describing, that's my experience of the US Open. Like US Open, I can get all the day session and then midnight comes round. That's when the night session starts. And then I have to decide how much sleep I'm going to sacrifice, which is why I missed the legendary Alcaraz Sinner match from a couple of years ago because I basically, again, similar to you, ran out of juice from being able to stay up by that point, which is ironic because I ended up sleeping in and woke up probably just as the match point was happening in that match. So I probably could have seen the very end of it, but had no idea it was gone because my brain was still doing the Windows dial-up noise.
You were still rebooting the system. But yeah, so again, the grounds have looked great from all the videos I've seen. So it definitely must be a very great experience to be there in person. And hopefully, one day we can both be in Australia. That would be really, really cool to visit in person at some point. But moving on to the tennis, I mean, for the first slam of the year, and I don't know about you, I just don't remember there being this much stuff going on in the first week of a Grand Slam, especially the Australian Open. I mean, I'll let you talk a little bit about the women's side where, just it was story after story. I do think on the ATP side, things kind of went the way you thought they would. I think some really standout players, Adrian Manarino had his moment until Djokovic kind of stopped him in what was almost a triple bagel, which would have just been insane. Arthur Cazou, who's the young French, I think, is he a teen? I'm not sure if he's teen or early 20s, but he's a young Frenchman who came in as a wild card, and he took out Holger Rune in the second round and went on a really good run, definitely showing some Alcaraz style, fun times on court, which I think a lot of people loved. So it'll be nice to follow him through the season. But for you, I think the WTA just created news story after news story every day.
Maybe every other day. Because it was very much a draw of two halves, where the half with Aryna Sabalenka and Coco Gauffin kind of proceeded as expected. Couple of details, didn't quite go how I thought, but the players I was predicting to do well, it was kind of a half chance for them anyway. To cut myself off in mid-flow, Jannik Sinner's just broken for 4-2. So in the fifth, so this match may be over soon. But going back to this, the other half of the draw was utter chaos, because all the names that you were expecting to get to the second week didn't. That's Iga Swiatek fell just short. Elena Rybakina fell dramatically short, and Jessica Pegula didn't really get going. Which opened it up for pretty much anyone. It was a massive opportunity for a couple of players who've been around for a little while, like Alina Svitolina and Victoria Azarenka, but then they fell in the fourth round. That was the story of the players you were expected to deliver weren't, and there were these other players who were kind of, I think all of them were kind of players that you could see coming to a certain extent. They were definitely working it and pulling themselves up. They'd been getting results to suggest they were going to impress, but the way they've done it and the fact it all happened at the same time against top players was what the surprise was.
Yeah, it definitely. I think you're right. It was every other day, and I think it was on the even days. So I think it was starting with day 5. Day 5 of the Australian Open was just, you could not turn on a match without it being some sort of upset or epic or something. And then it just kept being, so it was day 5 and then day 7 and then day 9.
Day 5 had the two best women's matches of the tournament on within sort of hours of each other, because you had Iga Swiatek coming from 4-1 down in the deciding set against Danielle Collins to win that match unexpectedly, but that was quite some comeback. Even I'd written her off at that point. And you had Elena Rybakina lose in a deciding set tiebreak to Anna Blinkova in it is officially a record longest deciding set tiebreak in a Grand Slam.
Yeah.
If not ever, where Blinkova edged it 22-20 and both of them had multiple match points.
Yeah, that was quite the epic. I just... Also, there lead up tournaments like we talked about before, going into the Australian Open. That was our last podcast. And, Elena Rybakina had just beaten Aryna Sabalenka. Was it 6-love, 6-1
it was pretty comprehensive.
It was like that. And then just to see the complete turnaround, but at the same time, she was fighting till the end, because that tiebreak was, that's, history making. That's going to go down in history as one of the longest and just craziest tiebreaks. And to have Anna Blinkova come out of it, and then do I think she went 2 more rounds after that, if I'm correct. But
No, she only went one more round.
But for you, it seemed like there were a lot of new people coming up on the WTA side, but who weren't completely, maybe not completely unexpected, but for you, all the players that had upsets and stuff, what do you think, who was the most impressive to you? Because we almost had a Raducanu, as they call it, someone coming from qualifiers.
Yes. Yeah. And actually, that's the player I think is the one who kind of encapsulates sort of everything. That was Diana Yastremska, who is currently ranked 93 in the world. She will move back into the world's top 30. She's been ranked as high as 21 in her career. Qualified for the tournament. I think she's 21, 22, from Ukraine, and made the semi-finals. And it was really weird because I was like, okay, surely she's going to lose to this player now. Okay, surely she's going to lose to this player now. Like, I thought she was going to lose to Azarenka. She didn't. I thought she'd lose to Noskova in the quarters. She didn't. And in the end, she ended up losing a pretty decently contested two-set battle with Zhang Qinwen in the semis. But yeah, she's a big hitter from Ukraine, can peak at interesting times. And yeah, for me, she's the player that kind of encapsulates everything of, in retrospect, looking at it, she qualified for Brisbane and then qualified for Australia. Like, she'd got a few wins under her belt. She had a little bit of momentum. But again, the quality of opponents that she was beating to then transform that to putting together a run to the semis in the way that she did, was great. So for me, Diana Yastremska is that player that was like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to the semis of the Australian Open, because, that's kind of where you start, looking at, oh my goodness, who's going to win this? And on the men's side, we got the semifinals that I think everyone, once the draw came out, was like, we want to see this. And it was Sinner versus Djokovic. The second semis was a little bit of an upset, if you can call it that, even though Zverev is in the top 10. So I wasn't looking at it as an upset. I was just...
And has a couple of decent wins over Alcaraz in his career.
Exactly.
As well.
I saw it more as surprising because I didn't think he was bringing that level to Australia. But looking back on it again, based on the United Cup and seeing Germany come out and win that, basically off of his back, and also Sigmund, who played mixed doubles with him.
Yeah, Lara Sigmund, yeah.
So he had just played so much. And then coming into the Australian Open, his form wasn't always there. I think he almost lost to Cam Norrie, which is another player who I think this tournament really stepped up his game and played some really great matches. He beat Casper Ruud, but then lost to Zverev, which was a very tight loss. Like, it could have gone either way. And the Zverev that showed up to play Carlos Alcaraz was out of this world. I mean, it was clinical. Like, he was serving, as they say, from a tree, him being so tall. And so he makes it to the semifinals of the Australian Open, and in what can only be called a choke to say, which is weird watching this match right now. Zverev lost that match from 2-0 And if you're paying attention to the news at all, Zverev has his personal issues happening in Germany. So that kind of seeped in to the Australian Open vibe as he kept going through the draw. So it was very interesting to watch his story, where you have a player here who's playing phenomenal tennis, but he also has these sort of personal issues going on. It was very interesting watching how the tournament dealt with it, the media dealt with it, and then also, the ATP, the governing body, because I feel like these are things you can't, avoid as a fan. They're just, it is what's happening. So I didn't want to gloss over that without mentioning it. But he did lose in the semis to Medvedev, who true to form so far in the tournament, was just battling his way through, and is now into the finals, and
he's 2 points away from losing. 30 love up on his on potentially his final service game.
I'll keep talking, but we'll bring the breaking news as it happens on this podcast. But
oh, if only we were live.
Oh, if only we were live. And that just takes us to Sinner and Djokovic, where I think coming into this match, and maybe I was in the minority, but I was pretty sure that Sinner was going to win, not based on Djokovic's form coming into the Australian Open, but based on his wins from last year. Because I think what I've noticed in general, as someone who's a fan looking from the outside in, is that Djokovic has had this sort of aura around him of the greatest player ever to play tennis ever. And that had an effect on other players. But as Carlos Alcaraz came through and started beating Djokovic and then beat him at what is considered his other home, Wimbledon, in the finals there, I think that just kind of gave other players a little bit of like, well, what if I could do this too? And Sinner last year at the end of the year at Turin and then at the Davis Cup, I think he gave himself the self-belief that, I've been working at this and I can do it. So I think these little sort of chips in Djokovic's sort of armor and gloss have created room for players to come in, because speaking of Novak Djokovic and his run to the semifinals, it was not easy. It was one of the sort of not most rocky, but it was definitely a rocky run to the end. His first match, which was against a young player, Dino Prismic, who was a qualifier into the Australian Open, was so crazy. I mean, he won it in 4 sets, but Dino put in a pretty good fight. And then that was followed by Poprin, who he also won that in 4. But you could start seeing the little sort of chips in the armor. So coming into this, I thought Sinner had this, and he did. He beat Djokovic in straight sets? No. Was it straight? No, it was in 4.
No, he beat 4. Djokovic in 4.
I think that was another match I woke up to, and Sinner was up 6-1, 6-2.
Same. I woke up in the middle of just as the tiebreak was starting in the 3rd set. I'm assuming you've just seen what happened.
Oh man.
Jannik Sinner is the Australian Open champion. We've just seen it live. Well, actually, I haven't seen it live because my internet dropped on match point.
No, come on.
No, I have not seen the match point. I've literally just turned it back on to see Sinner walking back to his chair.
Oh,
but
man.
No, the internet stopped working.
Watching him hug his team. Oh, this kid. So good. Jannik Sinner is a Grand Slam champion.
And, one of the reasons why I was kind of torn about this match and sort of feeling like not going all in on Medvedev was I felt like Sinner kind of earned it, having beaten Djokovic, who hasn't, he'd been to 10, Djokovic was 10-0. He'd never lost an Australian Open semi-final. He hadn't lost in Australia for 5 years. So it was to take down Djokovic at the Australian Open is almost as impressive as taking down Rafa at the French. If you know anything about tennis, you will know that is incredibly hard to do. And so for me, it was like, if you beat Djokovic and don't win the Australian Open, that is just, you've almost done half the job. You've got to be gutted because you've done half the job. A bit like losing a Grand Slam final from 2 sets to love up, which, Medvedev, he really refused to lose this tournament, including against Zverev. And he just didn't have enough in the tank to keep up the tennis that he was playing in the first couple of sets, because obviously he missed the first couple of sets, but Medvedev was playing much more aggressively than he usually does for the first set and a
Yeah, and he
half.
probably had to keep up that level, but he's been on court so much this period. It's
Yeah.
it is a shame. It is so sad to see. I almost can't look at his side of of the court right now. Like, please don't show Medvedev. Please don't show him.
Please
Please
don't
don't
make
make
us
us
sad.
sad. But and that's it's kind of the joy of tennis, and also the sadness of tennis is that I am so unbelievably happy for Sinner. Oh, look at him drop to the ground. So for me, I think Sinner has always just been, you know, he's a very quiet player. He's not, Carlos Alcaraz, Showtime, because that's just what Carlos is. Carlos is like an
Yeah.
entertainer, and he defaults to that a lot. Sinner has been very quiet, and I think he got a lot of criticism for it, being like, this is supposed to be the next guy, but he's not really winning. And, but he went through this whole slow and steady wins the race. And he always talked about his process and learning from matches and things like that. And to finally see it all come to fruition at the end of last season, everyone calls it post puke Sinner, which happened in Beijing. He was having stomach issues,
Yep.
I guess, in the beginning of the tournament, and he threw up into a bin that was near the court. And literally ever since that match, he has been a different human being. There's no other way to explain it, but he's won the majority of his matches since then. And it's been kind of great to see, but it's not come out of nowhere, as they say. I think you've seen his process over the last few years, slowly and slowly. And I think most people only really saw what he was capable of when he played Alcaraz, because for some reason, them playing each other just brought out the best tennis. But finally, you're seeing it in these big stages. And I'm super happy that he's finally crossed the line. And, I think a bigger conversation to have, which not in this podcast, but maybe when we go into, kind of the, this different generations of tennis players, it's sad to see what was the next gen, Tsitsipas, Zverev, Medvedev. They only have one Grand Slam between them. And now you have the next gen, Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, Holger Rune, have three between them. And they seem to be accelerating way past the next gen. It's a great time in tennis. It's really a fascinating time on both sides of the tour. And while, we watch the ceremony and all that, why don't we talk about what happened in the finals of the women's, which was against Aryna Sabalenka, who we haven't really talked about her run to the finals, but I think you should. And then Qinwen Zheng, who made it to the finals.
Well, I mentioned Zhang Qinwen. I don't know how. I think that's how her name is pronounced, just based on listening to Chinese fans at Wimbledon. Went to watch her match against Katerina Siniakova. Yeah, so Chinese names, last name is first. Yes. So, yeah, and I need to listen to the pronunciation, but I'm not entirely sure it's actually a K sound. Although, having said that, the Chinese fans who know English do like the fact that she is referred to as Queen Wen, because who wouldn't love that nickname? I was very impressed. I'll start with Zhang since we're talking about her now. And I've mentioned her already, beating Yastremska in the semis. I was very impressed because after Swiatek and Rybakina and Pegula and a few other seeds went out in the top half of the draw, by round, I think it was literally, after Rybakina went out, Zhang was the highest seed left in her quarter. When Swiatek went out, Zhang was the highest seed left in that half of the draw. So I've seen other players in the past kind of wilt under that pressure of, oh, heck, I'm the favorite now. and she didn't. She had a bit of a wobble against Wang Yifeng in round 3, needs to go to a deciding tiebreak. But Zheng, after that, didn't look like she was going to be threatened like that much. I mean, she had a bit of a slow start against Kalinskaya in the quarters, but generally, just made a sort of a favourite's progress into the final. The problem was that when she went to play Aryna Sabalenka in the final, who was an even heavier favourite, not just because they was the defending champion, but she had crunched her way through that draw. She had stomped on every single opponent. She double bageled Lacey Sorenko in round 3. She wasn't dropping more than 5 games a match until she played Coco. Coco was a different story because that semi-final was actually super close that they played. And I wanted to get Coco in there because that first set could have gone either way. They were both up in that set at different points. Coco could have won that set, and then she didn't. Second set was super tight all the way through, and then Sabalenka got the break and finished it off. But there is a universe where if some things hadn't quite gone Aryna's way, we could be talking about Coco Gauff as the Australian Open champion. But she didn't, because Australia's Sabalenka's home turf, only in the last 2 years, only Elena Rybakina has been able to get sets off her. So really, maybe it's an exaggeration, but certainly in the country of Australia, Rybakina is the only person who's pushed her. The entire country, she seems to love it there, and she showed that against Zheng. She was just a level above what Zheng can produce right now, and it just would never seemed in doubt that Aryna Sabalenka would win her second Australian Open, and kind of say, "Hey guys, still here.
Now a 2-time
still
Grand
here,
Slam champion."
Yes, and I would say safely kind of cements her status as, when we look back on this sort of decade, this era of tennis, one of the best players of this era, up there with Swiatek and Osaka and Barty, if anyone remembers Ash Barty.
And I do...
Yeah, I think it's her and those 4. And Coco's going to join that, but big shout out to Sabalenka. I think this is going to go down as the greatest moment of her career.
Yeah, definitely. I think she's a player who, if you remember, suffered from incredible yips and could not serve, and that is not an exaggeration. And, even when she overcame that and moved on, I think she had to also then work on sort of her mentality because, I watched that final between her and Coco Gauff at the US Open. And, Coco played great. I mean, Coco is an incredible mover and was getting to every single ball. But Aryna lost that match for herself in her mentality. She just lost it. She was so angry, and you could see it on court, and you could see how it was affecting her game. And getting back to her semifinal match here with Coco Gauff, I think that was a little bit of a breakthrough for her too, because yes, it was an incredibly close match. But in that first set, Sabalenka was leading 5-2 in the first set, and then it went into a tiebreak. And I think old Sabalenka, if that had gone to a tiebreak, would have probably lost that tiebreak just based on her emotions. But she really held it together in a way I haven't seen her do in so long that, I was like, wow, she's making a breakthrough. Will it always be like that? I think her team was asked about that question, and they're like, well, she might not always be able to hold everything in, but it was nice to see that she can, and she can focus. And I mean, not drop. And, I think you said it, she didn't drop a set on her way to the finals. The score lines were bananas. It was 6-love, 6-1, 6-love, 6-1, 6-2, 6-love, 6. I mean, she crushed her draw and really, really dominated this tournament in a way that I haven't seen a player do recently. except for Iga. Iga tends to do that too at the French Open. And
although she's only won the French dropping a set without dropping a set the once, and that was the first time she won it.
Yeah, I mean, really great for Aryna. Really happy for her. Let's see how this takes her through 2024. But I think, again, like the rest of the tour is on notice, because it's not even like she's been to one final. Her record last year of Grand Slams were just full of semifinal rounds or finals, so she makes it.
This is the 6th consecutive Grand Slam where she's made a semi-final at least.
So she's really an A-plus player, deservedly of the number 2 position of the WTA. And let's see, I love that sort of rivalry between her and Iga, like who's 1, who's 2. And I just want to see more of that coming into 2024.
And when they play each other as well, it's always fireworks. Like, even in the straight set stuff, there's always been stuff that's sort of heart in your mouth moments from both players. So, I think I'm really interested to see how their rivalry goes. I think they could be projected to be potentially on equal points by Indian Wells.
Ooh, that would be fun.
Depending on how the next month goes. Yeah. And then although having said that, Coco's going to be in the mix for number 1 as well by that point.
Yep.
Coco brings another into the game of like that excellent defensive game that she has. And you were saying about that first set in the semi-final, like Sabalenka wasn't just 5-2 up; she was 5-6 down. Coco was serving for that first set before it went to the tiebreak.
Yep.
So like. Sabalenka almost did crumble, but kind of rallied and kind of dominated that tiebreak. It is I think we do talk about how Sabalenka handles situations a lot, but I think more often than not, she handles them well. Actually, I think that she handles them good more than bad.
Again, I said it earlier in the pod, but I'm so excited for this season of tennis. So many exciting things are happening, and it just feels like a moment for tennis. And I'm excited to see where it goes. But let's talk about the men's final. And it was a final between...
We've already... Have we not already done that?
We talked you through it as it was happening. But just the bigger points, I think going into this final, Sinner and Medvedev, I was 100% behind Sinner, because he, again, is someone who, like Aryna, I love seeing that in players or athletes in general who maybe have a problem, have a weakness, and they work hard to get over that and become better at it. And, I think Sinner, coming into the end of last year, had a losing head-to-head against Medvedev. He still does, actually. Currently, weird. He still does. 6'4" now.
It is 6'4", but before the bin, pre-puke Sinner was 6-0 down in the head-to-head.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And then it was at Beijing that Sinner finally got the win against Medvedev to win that title. And, was it a fluke? We didn't know. But then they played again in Vienna and Sinner won again. So it was one of those moments where you saw that he finally understood how to play Medvedev and come up, like sort of start chipping away at that head-to-head, almost like he's now done with Djokovic, where he's figured it out. He knows what he needs to do to win these matches. So coming into this final, I could not, the head-to-head was 6-3. All the 3 wins were post-puke Sinner. And I just didn't see how he was going to lose it. At the same time, Medvedev coming into this final, I think he was very, very disappointed with his performance at the US Open against Novak, where he lost that match. And you could just tell throughout this tournament with the way he was fighting and clawing at every single match that he really wanted to win this. Like, he really wanted to come in to win this. And I didn't watch the first 2 sets. I'm going to, but hearing from Nick, it seems like he was playing super aggressive, but then he just couldn't hold the level. And now this is another devastating loss for him from 2 sets to love up again. The last time this happened was at the 2022 Australian Open, again against Nadal. Maybe Australia is not for you, Mehdi. Maybe try again at the US Open.
I mean, this is getting Murray-esque because Andy Murray also famously, couldn't win an Australian Open final against Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic. He lost 5 finals, never won it in Australia. I'm hoping the same thing doesn't have to happen to Medvedev. I would love him to get it, especially since he's in the mix on hard courts. Like he's been in the final of the hard court slam for most of the last couple of years, the Australia and the US. It's a bit of a shame for Medvedev, but obviously Sinner's run, he did ultimately deserve it, and it was very sets 3 and 4 were super close. Sinner only broke Medvedev in the last games of those sets, and it's because Medvedev got tight. So I'm interested to see how he handles that, because I think Medvedev was probably closer to winning that match than it might appear, even if he couldn't maintain. I wouldn't say the level, I'd say the energy, because he did fall back onto his normal kind of game plan, and it was enough to hold off Sinner for the most part. But obviously Sinner's figured out the standard Medvedev game plan. But we'll see how the rest of the year is. I'm hoping it's not Medvedev going off the boil for the rest of the year, because I'd love to still have him in the mix with Sinner, with Djokovic, and with Alcaraz.
I've really loved sort of what's happening on the top of the ATP rankings right now, with it being Novak, Alcaraz, Medvedev, Sinner. You can see in level, at least, they have almost sort of separated themselves from the rest and, been a top tier. I love the way they all fight against each other and, who's going to come up over the next person. So yeah, it's been great. This will be the thing with Medvedev too. He's so pragmatic. So hopefully he kind of can see the good in his fighting spirit and getting to the finals in the end. Like we said, he was almost out like 3 times this whole tournament. So hopefully he can kind of see past that and see past this loss and, not have a dip in the rest of the season like happened in 2022. But yeah, let's wrap this up with our players of the fortnight and then talking about what else will be happening on tour really quickly, because tennis never stops. This is only the beginning of the season. Can you imagine? This is only the beginning of the season. I'm gonna need like a week off to catch up on sleep.
Good thing. So yeah, I don't have the calendar in front of me right now, as you can imagine. But so I don't know every tournament that's coming, but I know some of the big ones. So next couple of weeks, we've got a couple of WTA 500s happening. One is in Linz, which starts on Monday. The only top 20 player involved, I believe, is Jelena Ostapenko. Everyone else is kind of getting in with like wild cards. It's kind of a sort of a tournament for kind of some of the lower ranked players to get themselves some points. There's also a tournament going on in Hua Hin in Thailand, happening at 250. And then the week after is a 500 event in Abu Dhabi with quite a few big name players involved as a warm-up for the following couple of weeks, which will be the Middle East double in Doha and Dubai, where it's 2 WTA 1000 events. So, the tour, as you said, like tennis doesn't stop. This is only the beginning. Insert swelling music here as the tour heads towards the Middle East and we get another sort of big points events ready for the Sunshine Double in March, April. But you want my player of the fortnight, don't you?
Yes.
Or do you want to do ATP coming up?
No, who's your player of the fortnight?
So the obvious choice is Aryna Sabalenka, given her run. However, I thought I'd go a bit different because you never picked the winner for your player of the fortnight. So I thought, who symbolises sort of the nature of the Australian Open? Who's someone who capitalised on the chaos, showed kind of tennis that was kind of benefiting everyone on these courts, but also kind of emphasised what the Australian Open is going to be remembered for this year, other than Sabalenka being amazing. And that's Diana Yastremska, who made the semi-finals I think being a qualifier and then getting through the draw that she did, full credit to her. She's someone who has been touted as a talent for a long time, and I think it's nice to see her get a significant result for her career. So I think what we'll talk about was sort of crazy WTA draw. Diana Yastremska is the player of the week, of fortnight for me.
That's awesome. I'm going to default to what you usually do and just pick the winner. Obviously, Jannik Sinner is my player of the fortnight. Because just...
Oh, so predictable.
I know.
How many times have you picked Sinner for player of the fortnight since we started this podcast?
Oh my goodness, don't count. Nobody should count. It's been a lot. But the way he came...
We need a wiki team, guys.
I know, we do. But the way he came into this tournament, another thing we probably didn't say, he did not drop a set until the match with Novak. He kind of pulled a little bit of Aryna, and until his semifinals against Novak had not dropped a set. And you could just see the determination inside of him, his belief in his game. And if he keeps playing like this, it's one of those things that we always say about Novak is like, well, if he keeps, who's going to beat him? But I don't know who's going to beat him. I think he has a leading head to head right now against Alcaraz. It's pretty close. It's just one match, but still he's playing so well. And I want to see if he can sort of become a dominant player in the way Alcaraz kind of did after 2022 last year, where he just kept winning tournaments, and can Sinner do that? And how does the rest of the tour respond to that? That's always my joy in tennis is, yes, there could be a dominant player, but I'm always looking to see how other players respond and if they can. And that's what makes it exciting for me. I tend to get bored if it's like the same person every week in, week out, winning the tournaments. So I like more sort of intrigue and conflict there. But
you mean the same person winning player of the fortnight episode after episode?
Well,
I'm gonna say
Nick.
that. Yeah, just something I want to put on the Sinner is sort of like, actually his breakout is kind of this moment for him is actually almost a weird combination of how Federer broke out and how Djokovic broke out. Because Federer broke out in 2003 in a very similar style to Sinner, in that, he was this player that everyone was talking about, but couldn't seem to get the job done later in the tournaments.
Yeah.
And then something clicked when he was like 21. It just, coming up to his 22nd birthday when he won Wimbledon for the first time. And then with Novak, he got this incredible end of season in 2010, including winning the Davis Cup for Serbia. And obviously Sinner leading Italy to a Davis Cup win for the first time in a long, long time, since the 70s. That's given him the momentum boost. So there's these interesting parallels here for Sinner. I'm not necessarily he's going to be a GOAT, but he's a carrot who will make do with that.
He is a carrot. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Okay, so what else is happening? There's so much happening on tour, guys. I think as we go through this year on the podcast, when it comes to talking about what's coming up next, I think, we'll focus a little bit at mostly the bigger tournaments and, where the top players are over the year, because there's just a tournament every week and there's a 250 somewhere happening at some point. But following in Nick's stead, to just sort of like hit on the big ones, the Dallas Open is coming up soon, where Frances Tiafoe is defending champion there. Montpellier is next. I think Holger Rune actually got a wild card into that because he hadn't initially entered. And then
he's the top seed by miles.
By a lot. And, I think that tends to happen sometimes when maybe a player exits a slam early, they, find the next tournament. I think that's what happened to Medvedev last year when he got out of Australia early. But Carlos Alcaraz is heading down to South America, but that's where we'll see him next play. And all this is just building up to the Sunshine Double, which I think is, on the men's side anyway, the next Masters coming up, which will be in Indian Wells and then Miami. So yeah, that's what's coming up on tour.
It's an interesting place on tour for following tennis, actually, because this is like the one segment of the tour where literally tennis is fully global.
Yeah.
Like the men, you've got tennis going on in the Middle East because the men are going there as well. They're just, their tournaments are not Masters level. You've got the tournaments going on in South America, and you've got some European indoor events, and you've got people starting to work on North American hard courts ready for the Sunshine Doubles. So yeah, this is where tennis is global. So if you're listening to us from whatever part of the world you're in, you're very lucky, because there's probably going to be literally tennis 24 hours a day. And at the very least, there's going to be something happening in your time zone to follow.
Exactly. It's a really good time to follow tennis at your own pace, like they say. And we'll keep you up to date. Follow us on our socials. We're on Threads, where I update on matches that interest me going on. I'm not going to watch all the tournaments, guys. I'm not. I'm going to pick one and stick with it. And if a fun match happens somewhere, maybe I'll update you on that too. And then we're also on Instagram. You can follow Nick and I as well on Twitter. I'll put our Twitter handles, or X. I still call it Twitter. I'm sorry. Our X handles. I'll put that in the description. And we will see you on the podcast in 2 weeks. This has been great. It's been an awesome Australian Open. I am very excited for this season coming up. Oh my goodness. We didn't even talk about Rohan Bopanna becoming like the oldest #1 doubles player. We didn't talk about Mira Andreeva. So much happened during this Australian Open.
Yeah, Bopanna, one of the biggest news stories of the tournament. Yeah, becoming the oldest first-time winner of a major at 43, oldest men's world #1 in doubles, oldest male player to win any major. So yeah, that was a huge result. But yeah, we don't have time for that.
This would be a 4-hour
but worth
long
mentioning
podcast.
For sure. I think we're pretty good at being concise.
Yes.
Like you don't want to go on some of the other podcasts you can find me on if you don't want long ones.
Yeah. Thanks again for joining me, Nick. I will see you again on a podcast in 2 weeks, and we'll see you all on a podcast somewhere in 2 weeks. Bye, guys.